To truly grasp the depth of God's promise of prosperity, let's take a moment to imagine what it means for God Himself to prepare a path for us that is filled with His goodness, love, and blessings. One that goes far beyond anything we could accomplish on our own. When we think of prosperity, we often associate it with financial security, success, or comfort. And while God can certainly bless us with those things, His vision for our lives reaches far beyond material wealth. The prosperity God offers is about a fullness of life, a richness of spirit, and a peace that remains steady, no matter the storms we face. His prosperity fills the deepest parts of our hearts with purpose and joy, bringing satisfaction that cannot be found in worldly achievements. When we look at Scripture, we find that God's plan for prosperity involves a life lived in deep connection with Him. This connection goes beyond outward success and reaches into the very fabric of who we are. In Psalm 1, we read about a person who is like a tree planted by streams of water, which yields its fruit in season and whose leaf does not wither. This is a beautiful image of the prosperity God desires for us. A life that is firmly rooted, well nourished, and bearing fruit in all seasons. This is the kind of life that remains strong in times of hardship, resilient in the face of challenges, and fruitful even in difficult circumstances. God's prosperity means that we are constantly being renewed by His Spirit, that our lives are continually yielding fruit that brings glory to Him, and that we are deeply anchored in His love. Imagine living each day with the assurance that you are part of a divine plan, that your steps are guided by a loving Father who knows exactly what you need and when you need it. This is the path to God's prosperity, a path that brings peace and joy regardless of our circumstances. When we walk in this assurance, we begin to experience a kind of freedom and confidence that transforms how we see the world. Instead of being driven by the pressures of society or the need to keep up, we are free to live in alignment with God's will, finding joy in His presence and contentment in His provision. We start to see that true prosperity is not found in accumulating more, but in being more, More like Christ, more compassionate, more patient, more grounded in faith. God's prosperity invites us to lay aside our own plans and surrender to His will, knowing that His thoughts are higher than ours and His ways are beyond our comprehension. Consider the story of David, a young shepherd boy chosen by God to be king. David's path to prosperity was not immediate. It was filled with years of preparation, trials, and waiting. He faced obstacles that would have discouraged most people, being hunted by King Saul, enduring the loneliness of exile, and facing countless battles. Yet through it all, David trusted in God's promise. He understood that prosperity wasn't about achieving power overnight, but about faithfully walking in God's will. Even when the journey was difficult, David's life is a testimony to the fact that God's blessings often come after seasons of waiting and growth. His prosperity wasn't just a position on a throne. It was a life transformed by God's faithfulness, a legacy that still inspires us today. When we think about God's plan for our lives, it's essential to remember that His prosperity doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it involves taking paths that are unfamiliar, facing challenges that refine us, and waiting patiently for doors to open. But through it all, God is at work, preparing us for blessings that are far greater than we could imagine. In these seasons, it's easy to feel discouraged, to wonder if we're really on the path to prosperity. But it is in these very moments that God invites us to trust Him more deeply, to rely on His strength, and to allow Him to shape us according to His purpose. Each step we take in faith draws us closer to His heart, deepening our understanding of who He is and strengthening our relationship with Him. This journey toward God's prosperity is one that requires us to walk by faith, not by sight. It asks us to hold on to His promises even when we can't see the outcome, to believe in His goodness even when life is difficult, and to trust that His timing is perfect. Walking in God's prosperity means embracing a life where we find peace, not in our circumstances, but in our Savior. It's a life where we are deeply rooted in His Word, continually nourished by His presence, and fully surrendered to His will. This kind of prosperity fills our lives with a sense of purpose that can't be shaken, with a joy that can't be stolen, and with a love that overflows into every relationship, every decision, every moment. Think about what it would mean to live with this kind of confidence in God's plan. To wake up each day knowing that your life is held in the hands of a God who loves you unconditionally, who knows your heart's desires, and who is committed to leading you into a future filled with His blessings. This is not a fleeting kind of prosperity. It's an eternal promise, a guarantee from a God who never breaks His word. God's prosperity is woven into His character. It's part of who He is. When we walk with Him, we are stepping into a life that reflects His goodness, His faithfulness, and His boundless love. Ultimately, God's prosperity is about drawing us closer to Himself, about transforming us from the inside out, and about making our lives a reflection of His grace. It's about finding satisfaction in His presence, joy in His promises, and strength in His word. When we understand this, we realize that the greatest prosperity we could ever experience is a life lived in communion with God, a life where we are fully known, fully loved, and fully blessed. As we journey toward this promised prosperity, let us walk in faith, trusting that every step, every season, every challenge is part of a divine plan. Let us be people who are rooted in His Word, who are strengthened by His Spirit, and who are guided by His love. And as we embrace this path, may we come to know the depth of God's prosperity, a prosperity that fills our hearts, shapes our character, and transforms our lives. Let us hold on to His promises with unwavering faith, confident that He who began a good work in us will carry it on to completion, leading us into a future that is truly blessed beyond measure. This is the life God has called us to, one that is rich in His love, abundant in His peace, and overflowing with His grace. To understand God's promise of prosperity, we must redefine what we often think prosperity means. In a world that measures success by status, wealth, and achievement, it's easy to assume that these outward markers are the truest signs of a blessed life. But God's measure of prosperity is different. It reaches beyond what the eye can see and the hands can hold. When God speaks of prosperity, He is inviting us into a life that is rich in peace, overflowing with joy, and filled with purpose. His prosperity transforms us from the inside out, leading us into an abundant life that rests not in what we possess, but in who we are becoming in Christ. Kingdom prosperity is a reflection of His presence within us, a constant source of strength, a well of hope, and a foundation of faith that remains steady no matter the trials we face. Consider the story of Abraham, a man whose life exemplifies God's idea of prosperity. Abraham's journey began with a promise, a call from God to leave behind everything familiar and follow him to a land he did not know. God promised Abraham that he would become the father of many nations, that his descendants would be as numerous as the stars in the sky. But this promise didn't come with a map or a timetable. Abraham had to trust God, often walking in faith, even when he couldn't see how the promise would come to pass. Year after year, Abraham waited, trusting that God was faithful, that his word was true, even when circumstances seemed to contradict the promise. Abraham's prosperity wasn't measured by immediate success or worldly gain. It was measured by his growing trust in God, his willingness to walk in obedience, and his deepening relationship with the one who called him. This is the essence of God's prosperity. It is not a destination we reach, but a journey of faith that brings us closer to him. It's about learning to depend on God's provision, to trust in his timing, and to find joy in his presence. It's about realizing that every step we take in faith, every act of obedience, is part of a greater plan that God is weaving together for our good. And just as Abraham's life was filled with seasons of waiting, of trial, and of growth, so too are our lives. But in each of these seasons, God is with us, shaping us, refining us, and preparing us for the blessings he has in store. Prosperity in God's kingdom often requires us to lay down our own plans, to surrender our own plans, to surrender our need for control, and to trust that his ways are higher, his plans are greater, and his timing is perfect. What does it look like to walk in this kind of prosperity today? It looks like waking up each morning with a heart that is open to God's leading, a spirit that is sensitive to his voice, and a mind that is grounded in his word. It looks like choosing to live with gratitude, even in seasons of difficulty, knowing that God is working all things together for our good. It means allowing his peace to guard our hearts and his joy to fill our souls, even when the world around us is uncertain. This kind of prosperity does not come from anything the world can give. It comes from a deep and abiding relationship with God. It is a prosperity that fills us with hope, strengthens us in faith, and roots us in his love. God's prosperity invites us to live with a perspective that is eternal, to see our lives not as a series of random events, but as part of a divine plan. When we trust in God's promise of prosperity, we begin to see each day as a gift, each challenge as an opportunity for growth, and each blessing as a reminder of his faithfulness. We start to realize that our lives are not our own, that we are part of something much bigger, something that goes beyond our individual plans and dreams. We are part of God's kingdom, called to live in a way that reflects his love, his grace, and his truth to the world around us. And as we walk in this purpose, we discover that God's prosperity is not just for our own benefit, but for the benefit of those around us. Our lives become a testimony of his goodness, a beacon of hope for others to see, and a reflection of his love that draws people closer to him. Imagine what it would mean to live with this kind of perspective, to walk through each day knowing that you are deeply loved, that you are part of a greater story, and that God is leading you toward a future filled with his blessings. This is not a prosperity that fades or disappoints. It is a prosperity that endures, that strengthens, and that fills us with a joy that nothing in this world can take away. It's a prosperity that is built on a foundation of faith, a faith that knows God is faithful, that his promises are true, and that His love is unchanging. When we live in this faith, we find that our lives are transformed, our hearts are filled with peace, and our souls are anchored in hope. This is the prosperity God has promised, a prosperity that goes beyond our wildest dreams and reaches into the deepest parts of our being. It's a prosperity that brings us closer to Him, that molds us into His likeness, and that fills us with a joy that cannot be shaken. So let us embrace this promise with open hearts, trusting that God's plans for us are good, that His timing is perfect, and that His blessings are beyond anything we could imagine. Let us walk in faith, knowing that each step we take brings us closer to the prosperity He has prepared for us. As we delve deeper into what it means to walk in faith toward God's promised prosperity, let's remember that this journey is not always an easy one. It's a path that often calls us to step out of our comfort zones, to trust in God's ways even when they don't align with our own understanding, and to believe in His promises even when the evidence around us seems lacking. This is the essence of a life of faith, a life that chooses to rely on God's Word rather than on circumstances, that finds hope in His promises rather than in immediate results, and that holds fast to His love, knowing that He is faithful to fulfill every word He has spoken. Walking in faith is about surrendering to God's timing, trusting in His wisdom, and believing that His plans for us are filled with goodness, even when we can't see the full picture. Consider what it means to truly let go of our own understanding and to place our trust fully in God. In a world that prizes control, independence, and certainty, choosing to walk by faith requires courage. It requires us to quiet our doubts, to lay down our fears, and to surrender the need to know every detail of the journey. But this is the kind of faith that pleases God, the kind of faith that brings us closer to His heart, and the kind of faith that allows His power to work mightily in our lives. Hebrews 11:1 tells us, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." This means that faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting in the one who does. It's about believing that God's promises are true, that His love is unchanging, and that His plans for us are greater than anything we could imagine. Walking this path of faith requires patience, a patience that is grounded in the assurance that God's timing is perfect. Think of the story of Joseph, who was given a vision of prosperity and leadership at a young age, but was led through years of trials, setbacks, and waiting before he saw the fulfillment of that promise. Joseph was sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison, and yet, throughout it all, he remained faithful. He trusted that God was with him, even in the darkest of times, and that the dream God had placed in his heart would one day come to pass. Joseph's journey shows us that God's promise of prosperity often includes seasons of preparation, times when He is shaping our character, refining our faith, and teaching us to depend on Him alone. Every moment of Joseph's journey was part of God's plan. Every trial was a step toward the fulfillment of God's promise, and every challenge prepared him for the purpose God had in store. This is the essence of walking in faith. It's trusting that even the hardships we face are part of a divine plan, that God is working behind the scenes, and that His hand is guiding us toward His promised future. And just like Joseph, when we trust God's process, we begin to see that even the waiting is a blessing, that even the struggles are a gift, and that God's prosperity is woven into every moment of our journey. Imagine living each day with this kind of faith, with a heart that is surrendered to God's will, a spirit that is filled with peace, and a mind that is focused on His promises. This kind of faith allows us to approach each day with hope, to face each trial with courage, and to walk through each season with a sense of purpose, knowing that God is leading us towards something greater than we could ever achieve on our own. It's a faith that sees beyond the present circumstances, that believes in the goodness of God's heart, and that trusts in the perfection of His timing. This is the kind of faith that transforms our lives, that fills us with a joy that is unbreakable, and that draws us closer to the one who holds our future. Walking in faith toward God's prosperity also involves letting go of our need for control, of our desire to dictate how and when God's promises should be fulfilled. It's about releasing our plans into His hands, knowing that He sees the end from the beginning, and that His perspective is far greater than ours. When we let go of control, we open our hearts to receive the fullness of what God has prepared for us. We allow Him to lead us in ways that are beyond our understanding, to bless us in ways that are beyond our imagination, and to transform us in ways that bring glory to His name. This surrender is not a sign of weakness. It's a declaration of trust, a bold statement of faith that says, God, I trust you more than I trust myself. I believe in your promises more than I believe in my own plans, and I rest in the assurance that you are guiding me toward a future that is filled with your blessings. Faith, in its purest form, is a daily choice, a choice to believe in God's goodness, to rely on His grace, and to trust in His promises. It's a choice to live each day with an open heart, a heart that is ready to receive His blessings, a mind that is focused on His Word, and a soul that is anchored in His love. This is the path to God's prosperity, a path that may not always be easy, but one that is filled with purpose, peace, and joy. As we walk this path, we begin to see that God's blessings are not always immediate, but they are always abundant, always timely, and always perfectly suited to His plans for us. So let us choose to walk in faith, to hold fast to God's promises, and to trust that He is leading us toward a future that is filled with His prosperity. This journey is not just about reaching a destination. It's about becoming the people God created us to be, people who reflect His love, who live in His peace, and who are filled with His joy. As we walk in faith, may we find that our lives are transformed, our hearts are strengthened, and our souls are filled with a hope that is unshakable. This is the life God has promised us, a life that is rich in His love, abundant in His grace, and overflowing with His blessings. As we walk further on this journey toward the prosperity God has promised, we come to a powerful truth. Real prosperity often requires us to face and overcome obstacles. These challenges are not signs that we are on the wrong path. Rather, they are opportunities for God to shape us, refine us, and strengthen our faith. The trials we encounter are part of the process God uses to prepare us for the blessings He has in store. It's in the fire of adversity that our character is forged, our faith deepened, and our trust in God becomes unshakable. When we face these obstacles with a heart fully surrendered to God, we discover that they are not barriers to our prosperity, but stepping stones that bring us closer to His promises. Each challenge we face is an invitation to trust God more fully, to lean into His strength, and to grow in ways we never would if life were easy. Consider how God uses challenges to teach us reliance on Him. In our weaknesses, His strength is perfected. When we come to the end of our own resources, God steps in to provide in ways that are beyond our capacity. It is in these moments, when we have nothing left to offer but our trust, that God reveals Himself as our provider, our healer, our sustainer. Through every trial, He is drawing us closer to Himself, inviting us to depend not on our own abilities, but on His boundless grace. This is why James tells us in James 1:2, "For to consider it pure joy, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance, let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." God doesn't promise a life free from difficulties, but He does promise to use every challenge to bring us to a place of greater maturity, deeper faith, and more profound reliance on His presence. Obstacles often make us question the path we're on, but these moments of doubt are precisely where our faith grows strongest. When we face uncertainties, when we find ourselves in situations where answers seem far away, this is where we are given the choice to either walk by sight or walk by faith. Walking by faith means choosing to believe that God is working, even when we can't see it. It means trusting that His promises are true, even when our circumstances seem to say otherwise. It's in these times that we draw closer to God, that we cling to His promises, and that we find strength not in what we can accomplish, but in what He can do through us. This is the essence of faith. The willingness to trust in God's goodness, to believe in His promises, and to hold fast to His love, even when the journey is difficult. Think about the story of the Israelites on their journey to the Promised Land. God led them out of Egypt with a mighty hand, but their path to prosperity was not an easy one. They faced the Red Sea, an impassable barrier that seemed to stand between them and freedom. Yet, God parted the waters, showing them that His power knows no limits. He provided manna in the wilderness, water from a rock, and guidance by fire and cloud. Every obstacle they faced was an opportunity for God to reveal His faithfulness and for their faith to grow. And yet, there were times when the Israelites doubted, when they questioned whether they would ever reach the land God had promised. But God was patient, guiding them, teaching them, and reminding them of His faithfulness. Just as God was with the Israelites, guiding them and providing for them, He is with us on our journey toward His promises. The obstacles we face today are not insurmountable. They are opportunities for us to see God's hand at work, to experience His provision, and to deepen our trust in His power. When we face closed doors, delays, or disappointments, we can rest in the assurance that God is not surprised, that He is still in control, and that He is working all things together for our good. Every closed door is an opportunity to trust that God has a better door to open. Every delay is a chance to strengthen our patience, and every disappointment is an invitation to find our joy in Him alone. When we face these obstacles with faith, we find that they are not simply barriers, but blessings in disguise. They teach us patience, humility, and resilience. They remind us that we are not self-sufficient, that we cannot do it all on our own, and that we desperately need God's presence, His power, and His guidance. Each challenge reminds us of our dependence on Him. And as we grow in that dependence, we find a deeper sense of peace and purpose. We learn to rest in His promises, to find comfort in His presence, and to walk in the assurance that He is with us every step of the way. This journey of faith is not without its struggles, but it is filled with blessings that go beyond our understanding. It's in these moments of difficulty that God's strength shines brightest in our lives, that His grace covers our weaknesses, and that His love sustains us through every hardship. When we embrace the obstacles as part of God's plan, when we choose to trust Him in the midst of uncertainty, we find that our faith is transformed, that our relationship with God is deepened, and that our lives are filled with a peace that transcends our circumstances. So let us face each obstacle with courage, with faith, and with the assurance that God is with us. Let us remember that every challenge is an opportunity for growth. Every delay is a chance to deepen our trust, and every disappointment is an invitation to draw closer to the one who loves us with an everlasting love. God's promise of prosperity is not hindered by obstacles. Rather, it is through these obstacles that His power is revealed, that His faithfulness is demonstrated, and that His promises are fulfilled. As we walk this path, let us hold fast to His promises. Let us rely on His strength. And let us trust that He is leading us toward a future filled with His blessings, His peace, and His love. This is the journey of faith, a journey that transforms us, that strengthens us, and that brings us closer to the heart of God. As we bring this journey to a close, let's remember that God's promise of prosperity is not just a destination, but an ongoing relationship, an ever-deepening walk with Him that fills our lives with His presence, His peace, and His unending love. Every step we take in faith draws us closer to God's heart, aligns us with His will, and brings us nearer to the abundant life He has designed for us. But this promise is more than a reward. It's an invitation to know God more fully, to trust Him more deeply, and to live in a way that reflects His love to a world in need. God's prosperity is not simply a matter of material blessing or worldly success. It is the richness of life that comes from walking hand in hand with the Creator, a life where we are transformed by His grace, strengthened by His grace, strengthened by His promises, and filled with His joy. Now, this prosperity may not look like what the world envisions. It's not always about wealth or comfort or outward success. Rather, it's a prosperity that fills our hearts with peace that surpasses understanding, joy that remains through every trial, and hope that anchors us in God's faithfulness. This prosperity means that even in the midst of challenges, we can rest in the assurance that God is for us, that He is with us, and that He is working all things together for our good. This is a life marked by God's love, a life where we are deeply rooted in His promises and where our souls find rest in His presence. It is a life filled with the kind of peace, joy, and purpose that the world cannot give and cannot take away. So what does it mean for us today? It means that God's invitation is right here, right now. He is calling each of us to step forward in faith, to release our fears, to surrender our plans, and to place our trust fully in Him. He is inviting us to experience His prosperity, not just in what we have, but in who we are becoming in Him. This is a call to let go of anything that holds us back from fully embracing His promises. to cast aside the doubts and worries that cloud our vision, and to stand firmly on His word, knowing that His plans for us are good. God has a purpose for every life, a promise for every heart that is willing to walk in faith, and a future filled with blessings for those who choose to trust Him. Today, let us choose to say yes to God's invitation. Let us choose to believe that He has good things in store for us, that His timing is perfect, and that His love for us is unchanging. Let us embrace the journey with open hearts, with minds that are fixed on His truth, and with spirits that are eager to follow wherever He may lead. The path may not always be easy, and there will be moments when we face trials, questions, and even delays. But in every step, we can find joy in knowing that we are walking with God, that He is leading us toward His promises, and that His prosperity will meet us in ways we never could have imagined. This journey is a gift, and it is one that fills our lives with meaning, purpose, and a love that only God can give. I encourage each of you to take a moment to reflect on what God is speaking to your heart today. Perhaps He is calling you to let go of a fear, to surrender a plan, or to trust Him in an area of your life where you have held back. Whatever it may be, know that God is with you, that He is guiding you, and that His blessings are waiting for you as you step forward in faith. Don't be afraid to take that next step, for God's hand is holding you. His grace is empowering you, and His love is surrounding you every step of the way. And as we move forward, let us do so with hearts that are full of gratitude, with minds that are set on God's promises, and with spirits that are ready to receive all that He has prepared for us. Let us live each day with a sense of expectation, knowing that God is at work in our lives, that His prosperity is unfolding in ways that we may not yet see, and that His love is leading us into a future that is more beautiful, more fulfilling, and more abundant than we could ever imagine. This is the life God has called us to, a life that is rich in His presence, overflowing with His peace, and grounded in His unshakable promises. So, go forward in faith. Step into the journey God has set before you with confidence, with courage, and with a heart that is open to His blessings. Live each day in the light of His love. Walk each step in the strength of His Spirit, and trust that He is leading you into a life of prosperity that is beyond what you could ever ask or imagine. May your journey be filled with His peace, your heart overflow with His joy, and may your life be a testimony of His goodness to all who see. This is God's promise for you, a future filled with hope, with love, and with a prosperity that will last for eternity.